Thanks, everybody. It's quite a pleasure to be here in Amsterdam again and to be at Hack in the Box, which is one of my favorite things in the world. Today I'm going to talk to you about this idea of embracing uncertainty, because I think in our industry we have to deal with the fact that uncertainty is a way of life for all of us. And I took this job at RSA the day after the Secure ID breach, which some of you may be familiar with. These were interesting times to take a chief security officer job, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we get into it. So some things we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about, first of all, security today, and why should we change anything at all? And I guess this slide kind of speaks to that subject. I'm going to talk about what is big data and why it should matter to any of you and what you do here. And then I'm going to give some examples of big data, what it is, what it isn't, and hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A if I can actually see anything here. So let's talk a little bit about security today. Why change anything at all? Because it's all working so well for everybody, right? I guess I'll start with an analogy. How many of you have seen this movie called Moneyball by any chance with Brad Pitt? Any of you seen that? You know, I didn't have a good football or soccer analogy, so I decided to use baseball. I know many of you in Europe don't care about baseball. It's to me, baseball is about as boring as football. But it's 90 minutes of just people trying to hit a little ball. But the movie was kind of fun, if any of you saw it. Basically, the idea is this guy becomes the manager of a baseball team, and it's a losing team. They're losing all their games, and he has to try to make them a better team. The problem in baseball is you have to have cash, money to do this. And in order to get these high-paid players, you have to be able to spend lots of cash, spend lots of money to do it. And so how do you do that? How do you do that? What does baseball tell us about Anonymous? Well, okay, along came this young guy, and he said, listen, you're looking at it all wrong. In baseball, the way you judge a player in the old days was based on how well you hit the ball. So if you hit the ball with an average above 249, you were considered to be a really good baseball player, and you got a higher salary. And there were other numbers, but that was the main number. Anything above 249, you were a good baseball player, you could get millions of dollars. And of course, if you had a team full of these players, like the New York Yankees or something, you were, making, obviously, a good team, but it was a very expensive team. So again, in the movie, this guy couldn't afford to do that. This young guy came along, he said, well, those are the wrong statistics to be looking at. We should be looking at other statistics like the amount of times the person gets on the base at all, the amount of time they hit the ball, regardless of whether they get on base, and other factors, because when we add up all these factors, it will mean that the team will win more often. No one had ever looked at the data this way before, and no one had ever brought players onto a team based on these numbers before. So, of course, in the movie, what happens is that this manager trusts this young guy. He acquires all these players that have very low salaries based on these other statistics instead of this one. The team is very successful. They go to the championship. They don't win, but this model, which is actually a true story, it's called Picada, becomes the statistical model used to identify the future performance of sports athletes, not only in baseball, but in other sports as well. And just to give you an example, I pulled this off of Google last night. The column that is highlighted here, these are two teams, the Boston Red Sox and New York Yankees. You notice the batting averages. Again, that's that 249 that I showed you. You notice the numbers are all over the place. But the last three columns are an example of other types of statistics that are used in the Picada model, the model that this young guy at the time put together. And you notice that in the rank order, the numbers between the batting average and these other numbers don't exactly correlate. right? So the top batting average does not correlate to other numbers like on-base percentage and slugging average and things like that. And in fact, if I were to call out a couple numbers specifically here, you notice on one of the players, the guy with the top batting average of 310 has an average of 814 in one of the other figures, whereas one of the lowest averages, which is the top players on the Yankees, a batting average of 252, has one of the highest ratings overall. So he should really be the highest paid player. And this model, again, is used in many sports today, in golf, in football, and in baseball. So start thinking about this from a security perspective, because if we can do these kinds of things in sports, and why can't we do these kinds of things in information security to start predicting the future activity of people that we care about relative to attacks and things of that sort? There are other analogies. I pulled down the hit list off of my Amazon page last night, and this will give you some insight into the kind of crap that I buy. But you know, Amazon for 30, 40 years now has been figuring out pretty easily, if you buy one thing, there's 40 other things that you're interested in. And that's a very simplistic model called a preference engine. Grocery stores do it, other types of things do it. I was on my Facebook page last night. That's a picture of my 13-year-old son in the middle. But one of the things I noticed on the right is it was serving me an ad for martial arts of some sort. Okay, so there's two things. I was thinking, well, is it because somewhere on my Facebook page I've indicated that I've been in martial arts for a long time? Because, you know, it also sometimes gives me scuba diving ads, and I'm into scuba diving, right? And, you know, that's very simplistic. But I also looked further down in my Facebook page, and I noticed that I had a picture of my son getting his black belt in Taekwondo. And there were other references to Taekwondo on the page. So again, the question is, to what degree is this type of information data mined as well, whether it's recognition of different patterns visually or just information that's posted? And as you know, all of this information is data mined as part of an advertising process. Again, if this type of work is easily done, why can't we do this type of work relative to things we care about in security? Should be very, very easy for us to do to some degree. Well, one of the problems is that security, maybe 12, 13 years ago for the most part, moved away from what I would call a technical discipline and moved to a discipline in general that requires certainty versus uncertainty. And certainty goes around the idea of audit, right? Here's a checklist, follow this checklist, everything's okay, you're good to go. That can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. For example, depending upon where you live, maybe you believe that ISO 27001. You follow some regimen, you have your checklists or program, you have some goal for ISO 27001. When you meet those goals, you've got a good security program according to some people's estimation. I would argue that it's a bunch of crap, but some people feel that that's certainty. And unfortunately, that's what a level of management in a lot of our companies believe to be true, right? They bring in auditors who will come in, they'll do an assessment, they'll say, if only you were using this, you would be okay, or you would be measurable in some way, when we know that even if we did everything here or in other regulations, we would still be vulnerable. Even if we ran countless numbers of vulnerability scans every day, it wouldn't matter. And it's a complete waste of time for the most part. So certainty is something people want. We've been building certainty in other ways into our systems as well. If you think about a classic doctrine in security, you know, this whole prevent, detect, respond thing that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, how much money and time do we spend on prevention? You know, trying to make bad things go away, right? Firewalls, IPS, AV, all this other stuff, right? So this is how the bad guys see the prevent side of what we're trying to do. We spend a lot of money on prevent, and the rest of it is sort of visible. So again, this is where the certainty comes into the picture. But do you worry about the uncertainty, right? What happens to the things that you can't feel good about here? Now, sorry if this bothers anybody. Well, I'm not really sorry. I don't give a shit if it bothers you or not. But the reality is that, we're trying to say, well, if only I use custom snort rules, or I do this or I do that, life's going to be okay. Most of this stuff, it doesn't matter. I mean, how many of you have had a breach in your firewall in the last 7 or 8 years? I mean, I don't know anybody who has. And if you have, you shouldn't be working in this industry anymore. I mean, you got to go work in a grocery store or something. The reality is that this isn't the problem. I mean, what we need to do is take all of this stuff and just drive the cost out of it, because that's not where the problem is today. So this is not providing us any certainty. If we were to put a value on any of these technologies or these approaches and say, well, what percentage of certainty do I believe this is going to protect me? AV or IPS or firewall or next generation malware or this or that or whatever. It's not going to do it. We've also been told, anybody know who these 3 guys are? Anybody know? Come on, really? Somebody always knows. Okay, I'll tell you who they are. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We've always been told in this industry, don't sell what you do based on these 3 guys, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I'm here to tell you that you need to sell this based on this, because the reality is that people should be afraid, they should have doubts, and most importantly, we need to embrace uncertainty, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Do you know what new things Microsoft, did you see the latest Microsoft thing in the last couple of days? I mean, we don't know what is going to happen with Adobe. We don't know what's going to happen with any vendor. We don't know what the latest attack's going to be. We don't know what our company's going to do in terms of their political position from one day to the next. That's going to create some kind of situation where we can be subject to hacktivist attacks or other types of attacks. Uncertainty is something we need to embrace. There's this guy, Nate Silver. Nate Silver is the guy from that movie. You remember the part that the young guy played in the Moneyball that I talked about? It's actually based on a real guy called Nate Silver. And he has a book, and in the book there's a quote. It says, "Caesar recognized the omens. He just didn't think they applied to him." Okay? He was getting some information somewhere that somebody was going to come and stab him, but he wasn't listening. And we have this information too. We just need to learn how to deal with it in some way. So there is a price that we're going to pay for all of this chaos and turbulence in our industry and in what we're doing, but we have to learn to embrace it. We have to learn to accept the fact that it's a way of life. And I think that if we accept that, if you don't do anything this year, read this book, because it will help you understand that we need more data, we need more analytics, and we need to accept the fact that we need to move out of this limited world in which we view things into a bigger world. Now, part of that is starting with some ideas. The first idea is that threat models need to change. When we think about the adversarial landscape, how much intelligence do we really have about who the attackers are and what they really want? Everybody says, oh, yeah, I know all this stuff. What are you doing about it? How many of you have a model that's implemented in your security program that's dynamic, that really looks at the adversarial landscape and can link the adversarial landscape to specific campaigns and attacks? If you have that and you're doing it and you're updating it on a constant basis, then you're good. But if you just are sitting there saying, well, yeah, I know about all that stuff, but you actually haven't implemented an intelligence-based process to understand this, then you're not doing it, okay? If you're not bringing in information and tracking specific groups and starting to understand how they operate for real, then you're not doing this, okay? I mean, it's easy to just talk about this, but it's another thing to do it. And insiders is really tricky, especially if you're in a multinational company. There's been, there's a lot of talk about nation state and all of this, and everybody points to one country all the time when they talk about it publicly. There was a recent Mandiant report, APT1. I'm sure a lot of you saw that report. People who have been tracking adversaries for some time are familiar with all of the indicators of compromise in that report. I actually have a preview of the next Mandiant report on APT2. Do you want to see it? Anybody want to see it? Okay. This is it. I'm just kidding. That's not really it. It's Elton John in the corner, for those of you that don't know who it is. All right. You guys have no sense of humor. Must be Amsterdam. All right. All right, so how do we start looking at data differently? There is data of bad guys that we understand, and this is the security model that we understand from the old days. These guys show up at your door, we know they're bad. That's pretty obvious, right? They got guns and they look mean, and that's the model that we're used to. That's what IPS and AV does. We already have a signature, we have a rule, it says look for guys with guns. It's a finite data set with known questions. That's easy. Everybody understands that, right? The model that we're going for, however, is a different one. The different one is that everybody's dressed the same, in this case like Elvis Presley, and there's thousands of them, but one of them has a bomb strapped to their chest, and all we know is that everybody's dressed like Elvis Presley, or we think that's all we know. But the reality is that there are other data points we have that we haven't looked at before, similar to the baseball analogy. And so rather than a finite data set, we have infinite amounts of data potentially available to us that we need to bring in. We have unknown questions. Tomorrow it's the Elvis impersonators. The next day it's something else. We have to be agile and learn how to ask those questions. And then we have to have a way to process this information. So that means technology, and it means skills that maybe we don't have on our security teams. Everybody's still trying to figure out who's going to do the malware reversing for them. There are new skills you need beyond that. There's a lot of talk in this industry about this idea of the kill chain. I'm sure you've heard that 1,000 times already too. I stole this slide from Greg Hogland at used to be HB Gary. However you want to think about APTs, think about this idea of adversarial phases, right? Some sort of intelligence gathering or planning of an attack, creation of an exploit, delivery, exploitation, command and control, actions on intent, right? There's some phases of an attack, 7, 8, 20, pick a number of phases. It doesn't matter. Whatever model you use. What's interesting to me from a big data perspective is that as your defenses fail, as the preventative solutions that you've implemented fail, the cost to you increases. Okay, that cost could be you running around with your hair on fire, trying to figure out what's wrong, calling IT people, calling your friends everywhere, trying to understand what's going on, or true losses to your organization in terms of money, intellectual property, top secret information, whatever it is that you are responsible for. So that's that top red triangle there. As you know, once the adversary moves into your environment, the automation level decreases generally, and now you're dealing with more hands-on keyboard, lateral movement, net commands, different types of activities that potentially are more visible to you. Even if you can't see everything inside those activities because of encryption or other types of obfuscation techniques, there's a level of visibility that's potentially there, and that's where the opportunity is for us with big data. because it's in that sweet spot where the circle is that we have to decide what resources do we need to apply here in terms of acquiring data and in terms of analyzing that data. So what is that universe of information that belongs there, internal to our organization and externally, in terms of collaboration with people you know, within the sector that you belong to, for example, government, financial services, energy, telecom, high tech, whatever it is you do, and then bringing that together in a machine-readable form in some timely manner, because time really matters here. One of the problems that we have is that suppose you're doing what you do, and now you say, well, yeah, I want to do this. I want to get better at this gap, in this little circle here. Where's the money come from? I mean, you can't just go and say, give me 5 million euros. I don't know how that works in your organization, but it doesn't work well in mine. You've seen diagrams like this before. This is not to illustrate the hard on the outside, soft and chewy on the inside thing. This is to illustrate where the money goes. Go back and ask the question of where do you spend money on security? Really decompose that budget and take it apart and say, what do we spend on perimeter defense? What do we spend on AV? What do we spend on IPS? What do we spend on everything that looks like a preventative solution? The big wall around the castle there, or the town. Add up all that money and then ask yourself, what percentage of success, what percentage of certainty does that provide you? That's interesting math. Then ask yourself, in terms of detection, which might be the little towers that are around, and the big tower there, how much are you spending to detect the lateral movement, for example? How much are you spending to respond? Because in the moment when you realize, okay, there's been an exploit, there's been a delivery of some sort, there's command and control activity, how much money do you have to deal with that part of it, and then to do the analytics and the trend analysis and the intelligence work that you need to do after you discover all this? Do that math and see how it shakes out. Now, I'll tell you how it shakes out based on some research that we did. About 80% of budgets go to prevention. And this is based on what they call global 2,000 companies, about 150 companies. We had one of these big research firms do this. 15% for monitoring, so the detect side, and then 5% for response. Now, keep in mind that a lot of things go into prevention, right? The vulnerability scanning, configuration, all this kind of stuff, security training, all of that. So, but what is the right balance? If you were to say, I don't like that, because I don't think 80%'s the right number. Well, what is the right number? If you wanted to start thinking, well, I could use big data to solve some of these problems, what do you think's the right number? And there's no right answer here, because it's going to be a different answer for each of you. Well, I don't know. Let's suppose, just for the sake of argument, it was 1/3 to each. How do you get there from here? You can't just go from 2012 to 2013 and make that change. That's not going to happen. It's a big transition in terms of the way you do things in a lot of different ways. But obviously, it is something to think about in terms of rethinking your security budget. Somebody needs to think about this. All right, so let's talk about big data, because big data is really how you start addressing the part of this equation, which is uncertainty. So I've been in this job for 2 years, and one of the things that I had to figure out after the Secure ID breach is how do we stop doing traditional security work? Where I work, it was a classic environment where People were running at ISO 27001, running at a lot of different compliance functions, doing vulnerability scanning, doing everything that you might imagine in a security program. And then what? And then what happens? What do you start to do differently? If you look at some of that, again, a lot of the money was in that prevent bucket. There are things that you stop doing right away. For example, you stop doing ISO 27001 across the board. Not meaning that you don't try to have good security policies and try to make them successful. But the point is, if somebody says, well, we need to be ISO 27001 across the world just because, why? When I could use that money for other purposes. So I think there were 4 areas that I started to focus on initially in terms of looking at how I could get better view into how I could use big data. The first was security management. How can I get better visibility into everything that's happening? Especially in terms of the behavior of users, the behavior of devices, things of that sort, and look for standard deviations from good behavior. Not looking for bad so much. I mean, we already knew how to look for bad, as far as I knew, but looking for deviations from good. The second area was in fraud. We had, we have a lot of businesses where we have to deal with fraud, and so how do you do that? The third area was in authentication and user IDs, passwords, and what constitutes the speed of authentication events and other factors like that. And the fourth was how we track the controls in our infrastructure and drive the control structure to provide intelligence to everything else. I'm going to talk a little bit about all that. When you do this, you've got to set some specific goals for yourself, right? Because imagine when you go to a company and you want them to change everything that they're doing, you can't just go in and say, I'm going to change everything. They have to get on board with some basic ideas. So there were some ideas that we put out there. The first was that I wanted to have visibility into everything. If you think about the way we view data and security, what are some things that we use to look at data, right? Logs, right? But the logs that we were viewing in security were like security logs, right? Windows server logs, other types of server logs, network device logs, and they were all supposedly security specific. But I don't know if any of you work with logs at all, but there's not much in them really. I mean, they have a limited amount of data. So we had to go out and say, what constitutes that universe of information that I showed you on that kill chain slide earlier that is useful? And it goes beyond security logs. It's business transaction logs, it's full packet data, it's information from asset management systems, HR systems, travel systems, things like that, which means creating data definitions for those environments and finding ways to parse that into a data warehouse. And I'll talk about data warehouse a little bit more later. Actionable intelligence. We had to figure out what information we need now, and then what information we could wait a little bit more for. I don't know if any of you use like security information and event management systems like the one we have or some of the other vendors, but they're all slow. Don't tweet. Anyway, no, but I mean, they are, and the problem is that, like, okay, there's things that you need to know right now, and then there's things that you can wait a little bit. So again, the paradigm shift was, how do we organize that data in a way that is actionable? And I'll talk about that too. Agility was important because we needed to be able to change things, right? Write new parsers. Write new data definitions, whatever. Introduce new languages. Use open source. We wanted to do all that stuff, and we didn't want to be locked into any vendor solutions, including our own. And centralized incident management. One of the things that we also were dealing with was the fact that when we did have our hair on fire, we didn't want to be dependent on other groups for information, if that makes sense to you. I don't know if any of you encounter this, but when you are in the middle of an incident, to run around and try to get the network people to talk to you or the Windows people or whoever, it's very hard, especially if you speak security and they speak networking or IT or whatever. It doesn't always work out very well. There are other problems. So let's talk a little bit about the visibility problem. Disjoint sets. If you have an infrastructure that's grown up over time, it doesn't work well together, right? For example, if you're doing logging, you may have logging of host and network and different types of environments where if you try to bring data together, just look from, for example, from layer 3 to layer 7, you'll see that just the definitions of certain elements in those data sets don't match up very well. There's no normalization. A user ID is a different thing in different data sets. And that creates bottlenecks if you think about it. When I go to write a query, the first thing that has to happen is I have to resolve those differences in the data schema. So I either resolve them at the time of data capture, or I resolve them at the time of the query, or I resolve them some other time somewhere in there, right? When do I do that? So this is a problem, and you know, as you start adding more data, for example, full packet capture, host and memory, forensics, and things of that sort, it becomes a much greater problem with, you know, different storage silos. Imagine if you're a geographically dispersed organization, we have multiple data centers, and you can't do this over I mean, even if you have all the bandwidth in the world, it's very tricky to do this. So there are architectural considerations that you have to think about relative to how you acquire data, what type of pre-mining occurs on that data, where normalization occurs, and what data schema look like. So you have apples to apples entities at the right time. And this is a fundamental problem that needs to be resolved in terms of data management when you're thinking about big data. Two other problems have to do with event management and search. Historically, SIM has not been optimized to very large data searches, and the same with search tools like Splunk. You can't say, you know, go look at this 100 terabytes of data and give me a result in an ad hoc search. It's very hard to do. I don't know if you ever tried it, especially with unstructured data. So again, you know, how do you create a situation where you can have manageable rules running, manageable parsing, and things of that sort, and where you can set that up as part of that infrastructure, and where searching makes sense. And then, of course, there's the issue of intelligence. I'm sure many of you are, you know, participating in the intelligence lifecycle in some way or another, where you're getting, you know, at a basic level, for example, indicators of compromise. You know, maybe you're pulling bad IP address lists or domain lists from somewhere. You know, maybe you have access to very privileged data. Maybe you're taking layer 7 data, you know, regarding malware or file integrity data from somewhere. That's great, but to look at that data at the end of the life cycle, not so much use as taking it at the inception, right? When you're doing full packet capture or analyzing logs or business data, it would be great to join that data right at the time you capture it, right? Again, how do you organize this in such a way that you can get that done? So these are problems that you have to solve, and you know, they're critical, and you need a roadmap to be able to deal with this. From a process perspective, one of the things you have to ask yourself too is, do you want to run a security operations center, or do you want to run something more than that? I have the interesting position in this job of mine to be able to visit a lot of companies. You know, it's one of the great things about this job, and I get to see what people do, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And, you know, a lot of people are very happy that they have a SOC, and they should be. But a lot of SOCs are set up to where they have a tool of some sort, and they wait for that tool to pop up something. Look at this, look at this, look at this, you know, boom, 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 boom. And the problem is that if you think about how SIM is organized, most SIMs are looking at some correlation of firewall and log events based on known signatures. So you're dealing with things that we already knew and the attackers already knew, and correlated events based on that. Now, I'm not saying that for certain classes of attacks, that's not useful information. For example, exception to authentication events, I mean, SIM rules are very interesting in that regard. But if your team is looking at certain types of SIM events related, for example, to web application problems, it's not necessarily very useful compared to the exploit space that's out there. So, a lot of that stuff that goes on there could either be pushed out to somebody else to do more cheaply, or somehow the cost driven out of it. But I call it waiting for a smack on the head, compared to the other area where you're really more focused on taking the battle to the bad guy. Hunting for malware, hunting for things on your network in some sort, understanding the threat environment, the adversarial space that I talked about, and gaining those core skills. Now, I realize that some of you work in small organizations where you're like, how do I do all this stuff? Well, that's why you need to find partners that can help you with some of this. I mean, we have a pretty large security team, but we still find certain skills are difficult to maintain. And we look very closely to find, and there's some of the people are here in this room, to find people that can do this work for us. When you start thinking about intelligence, you've got to realize that there's a journey to get there. You can't go from not using external intelligence to being, some kind of cyber prophet, as I call it. And I put some examples in here for, sort of how, and I know they're hard to see in the back, but for example, you're an ad hoc user of intelligence if you find out about exploits by reading Computer World or some sort of publication. And no offense to any journalists in the room, it's just, if that's how you find out about exploits, well, okay, got some work to do. In the US, we have these things called ISACs, Incident Sharing and Analysis Centers, and these are collaborative entities among trusted partners within a sector. So, for example, the banks working with each other, energy companies, and so on. They tend to share information more readily about things that are happening to each other. So maybe you're getting that information, but you're not necessarily acting upon it in any proactive way. If you're an end user of the information, you might be taking this information and inserting it into your tools and asking your tools to look for this in some way. Look for an indicator, look for some signature or pattern or whatever it is that you got your hands on in some way. If you're a creator of information, you've actually on the other side of the kill chain where you're synthesizing attacks. You've discovered an attack somewhere in progress, perhaps, and you're looking at the end of it. You're understanding tools, tactics, and procedures of the adversary, and you're contributing that information to the community you belong to. So you're actually creating intelligence that you share with others. You're writing your own rules, synthesizing data. And cyber prophet, it's more a joke than anything, but this is where the AV companies come to you, they get information from you, and then they make believe it's their own information. Now, I know this is kind of an eye chart, but I don't usually use slides like this, but I put this in here, and I'll send this to anybody who wants it, because I use this internally to judge where we are with certain advanced capabilities relative to not the SOC, but the other thing that we're doing. And you have to decide what's right for you. When you start to use big data and you start to evolve certain capabilities like forensics, advanced incident response, having a threat intelligence team, and so on, what are the capabilities that you want? For example, in threat intelligence, under advanced, I have detailed campaign analysis. What does that mean? Well, to me, what that means on my team is that we have people that are dedicated to analyzing email attacks. That's all they do. They analyze email attacks. It's the only thing they do. And then when they analyze those attacks, they try to connect the dots between those attacks and specific adversarial campaigns. And those campaigns are identified by campaign code numbers. That's real work, and they work with other special teams, host forensics, network forensics, malware reversers, some of which are employees of ours, some of which are people such as yourselves that do this for, either as independent consultants or as part of a company, right? So where do you need to be on this? It depends. I mean, if your company makes shoes, you don't need to be at the bottom of this chart. But if you work in an intelligence service for the government, you probably do need to be at the bottom of this chart. Weird teams are the best teams, and I agree with that. This is a picture of what my weird team looks like. Before the breach, it was just the box on the far right. So that was the old SOC. That's what it looked like. Tier 1, Tier 2, 24/7, eyes on glass, hit you on the head, have a nice day. Okay? Now, lots of special teams. Malware reversing, cause origin determination. We do a lot of social media work, internally and externally, in terms of attack surface profiling. All of the social media information comes into my data warehouse, and it's analyzed against all of the internal data that I have. We do a lot of attribution. We do a lot of reviews internally of high-value targets and try to make connections between campaigns and high-value targets. We constantly evaluate how our tools are working and look at what tools we should de-emphasize or what tools we should spend more money on. And then we have people that are updating parsers and rules and things of that sort. This is a notional architecture. What goes into this? First of all, the idea of collection. You have to commit to some idea of collecting data, right? One of the tricky parts has been to move away from this idea of disparate collection to saying we're going to collect everything on a prioritized list. I've got a list of about a dozen categories of data that I want to collect. I don't know how to get there from here on some of them yet. I mean, I'll give you an example. SAP data. I don't know how to get there from here yet. I mean, I know how to look at SAP logs, and I assume some of you already know how to do that too. That's the easy part. But how do you get in the middle of those transactions and look for deviations from good? Because it's hard for business people to explain to me what a bad SAP transaction looks like. I mean, some of them are obvious. But, right, when things seem to be going well, I'm not sure, right? So these are challenges. But I have a list, and I want everything on that list. And I have a collection architecture, data warehouse, Apache Hadoop. Okay, why? Well, scale out n-tier architecture with inexpensive equipment. I can add storage till the end of time to it, add processors till the end of time, and I just can keep scaling that forever. I can add full context text searching with Lucene. I can add Esper. I can add all kinds of cool stuff to it. And I can add COTS vendor solutions to it. I can plug it into my SIM. I can plug it into, the RSA stuff that I have. I can plug it into third-party vendor solutions that I have. And that's cool. And with the Hadoop stuff, I can do a lot of the pre-mining that I talked to you about. I can set up a cluster, I can give it a bunch of tasks, and I can tell it to run to the end of time. And this is important when you're thinking about large amounts of data. Right? Remember we talked earlier about the fact that, well, how do I integrate information when you're dealing with hundreds of terabytes of data? It's easy if you start dedicating HDFS clusters to it and you just say, keep going, keep doing this. And the good thing about that environment is I can just keep snapping in additional libraries, additional capabilities to it. But that's where I'm storing months and years of data, log data, metadata from the full packet environment, business data, and so on. The real-time environment's a bit different. In that environment, that's where I need the full context of full packet information. But as you know, on a large network, you can't keep full packet data too long. So there you're dealing with maybe a 7 to 14-day horizon. But you still want a common metadata infrastructure that's normalized with all your other data, so that when you search for something as an analyst, you don't have to know, am I looking at a log or a full packet artifact? You're just searching for something, you get a result, and then it's only when you dig into the data that you realize, oh, I'm looking at reconstructed full packet sessions, or I'm looking at a log artifact from something else. Does that make sense? And then there's other plugins you could do. If you see on the far right, there's this box that says asset criticality. The idea is, how do you start connecting the dots between this environment and understanding if you've got, pick a number, 100,000 IT assets, which of those are the most important ones, which of those fell out of patch or configuration management, and have that be yet another intelligence feed into the process. Because that's the way you should just treat that, as just an intelligence feed. I think I need to speed up a little bit here. Okay, you get the idea. So there's a lot of stuff you could do with this. I mean, you can create, I have an example here that I just threw together for named pipes. Many of you probably are familiar with this idea, but for example, in this environment, this is right out of my environment, one of the things we look for is weird named pipes, okay? Very easy to create parsers that just basically catalog them. I don't know what's bad, by the way. I mean, do you? I don't know what all the valid named pipes are. I mean, maybe some of you do because you're smarter than I am and can probably name every single file in the Windows operating system. I don't know, but I mean, I don't know these things. But it's very easy, for example, to at least call out things on the network. So here's a very simple parser. Here's how it works. Basically, just offset a few bytes, okay? Figure out the name of it, blah, 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 success, capture some packets, and then boom, you've got, a list of stuff here, right? Now, again, I could have a parser like this running till the end of time. In the SOC, nobody would ever look at it. In the new world order that I've created, people do actually look at this, or I have rules that call out differences here. And differences are things like this. I mean, again, there might be something like that for real in Windows. I don't know, maybe, but maybe not. So this is something worth investigating. The other is that what we're starting to do is look at Esper for complex event processing in the data warehouse, where once we understand using this parser for good, right? Okay, so we see all these pipes, and we over time we know what they are, and we see the number of hits. When we now see 3 hits on pipe/hello, bang, it triggers a standard deviation. Now, three may not seem like a big number for you, but 3 for this would be an acceptable number. 1 would probably be an acceptable number, whereas in other categories, maybe it's 20 or 1,000 or who knows, I don't know. That's what data scientists do, is figure that shit out, But the point is that these are things you do. I mean, we have a lot of stuff like that we're working on. Is just how to figure this stuff out. And as you look at this problem, this is a very simple problem like this of seeing this type of stuff on the wire. Then you go, well, okay, what else would you add to this beyond just the simple data science of looking for deviations, like going, well, okay, now I can parse all the pipes, now I can look for deviations from a population of good. For example, here's a week or a day, probably a day is enough data for this environment. Here's a day of information, here's a deviation. Now, how could I eliminate false positives in that environment? Here's some examples. Whitelisting, external intel joins, right? Where you put out there, has anyone seen this? You get answers back, yes, I've seen this. And then you would either blacklist or whitelist it based on that, right? I mean, you guys do this all the time with stuff, and so on. There's more to this in the big data box. I mean, what else is in there? Everything's going to transform, because we've only been talking about like incident response and really basic stuff like that. But if you think about it, authentication has to transform. The fraud stuff, all of this has to go. So there's this whole life cycle that we've had in security that we've kind of been doing in silos that I want to see converge in some way. And I don't know how to do it yet, because I can't build too many things off the reservation. I get in trouble. So we have to have products to do it. But just some ideas, right? We know that username and password is going to die soon. I wish it would die tomorrow. Two-factor authentication, who knows where that goes? I don't know. What do you use? Your phone, your eyeballs, I don't know what you use. But I do like the idea of some combination of elements coming into play. We've looked at a lot of different things, looking at speed of authentication events, geo-related connectivity. If you log in here, then here, then here, it's just too fast. In terms of ground speed and things like that. Obviously, there are other factors related to integrating the travel system I mentioned to you. Looking at the HR system. We've done some interesting work around, I don't know if any of you have problems with USB sticks. In some places you can make them go away effectively, but in other areas it's very hard to make them go away. But we've done some interesting data related to work internally related to authentication events, USB inserts, and then looking at people that are contractors with N number of days left on their contract and correlating that data in real time and creating alerts around that. It's very interesting. Just that fact popping up as an alert and then matching that with host-based technologies gives you really interesting insight into things that are going on. But take these other data. I think if you imagine using this in a risk-based authentication model and then bringing that in, that could be good. Fraud is another one. I don't know how many of you manage websites as part of your job. You can't do like web application firewalls try to deal with the top 20 and deal with rules-based approaches. It's a failing strategy, as you know. The way to deal with it is probably more the whole crowd-based analytics, right? If you got 1,000, 5,000 web pages, you can't have rules for all of them, and they change constantly, and the attackers will hit them right after you figure out a new way to plug the hole. So, but if you look at crowds of people coming to a website and the behavior of those clouds and the click streams of those crowds, you can get a good sense of what good behavior looks like, and then use analytics to look for deviations in that type of behavior. And it's reasonable to look at that. And some ideas here are velocity, page sequence. For example, what is a sequence of activity based on thousands and thousands of click streams in terms of the velocity of a checkout event or of a browsing event or something? And when you combine that with origin or other contextual information from full packet, of HTTP or HTTPS if you're in the middle of the click stream, it becomes very, very interesting. And again, that can also lead you to other views into other types of problems like man in the middle, man in the browser type of attacks. And last is sort of this holy grail, which some people call governance, risk, and compliance. I think the issue there is what I call analyst prioritization. I mentioned to you briefly this idea of asset intelligence. I am like the anti-vulnerability scanning guy. It's not that I don't believe in doing it, it's just that I think people do it and they rely too much on it. Every week when you do it, the numbers change. and you can't get IT to fix it. It'll never be fixed properly. So I don't know what the numbers mean. I mean, if I showed you my numbers, you'd probably think I was terrible at my job. And I don't know what your numbers look like, but they're like this every week, up and down and sideways, right? What I want my people to focus on is prioritization, right? They should be focused on the most important assets that are under attack right now and get IT to deal with those in a timely manner. Everything else can sort of wait. IT's got too much going on. I mean, I'd like to think we're all ITIL this and that and Six Sigma black belts, but it doesn't work out very well. So this is a life cycle I'm trying to optimize, and data will help us optimize that life cycle. I think I've got about 4 minutes left, so I'm actually going to shut up and try to end this a little bit. I know some of you may say, well, I don't know how any of this applies to my job. I will tell you that everything you do is going to be driven by big data, whether you're just an analyst, doing malware reversing, whether you're responsible for an incident response team, whether you're in my job as a CISO, you've got to think that everything's moving in that direction. More data is better. It really is. And obviously there are security implications with big data too, for not only for what we do in security, but the business is going in that direction too with what they're doing with big data. But I do believe that a great opportunity for us is to not be behind the curve, right? I think this slide is kind of, my story on this. I mean, if we act like we're ignorant of the trends in IT, there's no excuse for it. So, we need to embrace big data. We need to embrace the uncertainty, and we need to find ways to deal with it as a part of our job. And we've done some innovative things internally. I think you'll see other companies that are doing this as well. I would encourage you to look into it. It does require investment. It requires a commitment to architecture. It's very geeky, technical data scientist work when you first get into it, but it's really fun. And as you can see, the vendors are all over it too. I participated in a white paper with a bunch of people on this, which I don't know, maybe you can get it on our site or just email me, I don't know. And it's not a vendor stupid white paper, it's just a vendor agnostic white paper. But feel free to ping me or download it if you want it. And I think we have about 2 minutes if anybody wants to ask any questions. So, thank you.
It looks to me that that you're trying to get ahead of the curve and you're doing a good job, but you're a security division of a very large company, you suffered a major breach, so you had things going for you to get this arranged within your company. Within my organization, I can never see this happening. And it scares me a bit to hear you say that products like Entrust and NetWitness are not helping you in this case. So you say, go out and try to find partners, but who can do this for me? Who can build me a system like this?
I could name companies, but I won't. But look, more and more, I guess the way I would answer the question is this. The managed security service providers that today, and I'm sorry if I offend anyone out here, but the managed security service providers that are out here that are just doing managed firewall and IDS, they're going to start feeling pressure from all of you who are saying, this shit doesn't cut it, right? They're going to have to step up and provide more advanced services. So we've seen in the US, here in the Netherlands, we've seen service providers step up and say, we are going to provide these advanced services. And some of them are. I was just in another country where I met a service provider who's doing it. There's one here in the Netherlands who's doing it. In the US, there's a bunch that have stepped up. It's like everything else, to your point. The larger companies for the last 2 years have adopted this approach to big data, and it's going to take time for the wave to hit. But my goal was not to tell you that, hey, if you're not doing this, you're behind, as much as this is something for you to look forward to and to move towards over time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Eddie. So I'm sure a lot of big companies who approach big data analytics and security for the first time, they bled as they try to figure this out. Can you give us any warnings or any, or what's the trade-off of putting too much focus in here? What's the dark side of big data as we begin to approach this?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, certainly we bled, and some of my peers who have done this on their own, you know, because if you think about it, if you were trying to do this 2 years ago, one of the problems you face is you could go out and buy, you know, for example, generic big data analytic tools. They're out there from vendors, or you could get all the open source stuff, bring it in, make the hardware investments necessary to do this, but then you basically have a blank slate, right? There's no security in front of it. So now you have to figure out all of the, quote, security analytics, and that's no small task. So that's why, that's a great point. I mean, so that's why I think it is a balance between saying, what is your tolerance for being on that edge today, or starting to work with vendors that get it in that space. And it's a tricky decision. I think the way I always position it to people is there's a plumbing aspect to it that can be dealt with today to some extent. In other words, there are things that we're doing in the back end of this relative to data capture, database management, things of that sort that are eminently fixable today regardless of the analytics space. The analytics space is basically nascent. I think that there's a lot happening. Over the next 3 years, you're going to see that explode in terms of the vendor space. But if in the analytics space, it's going to be folks such as yourself that, you know, in some cases have very advanced skills and are comfortable with command line and comfortable with, you know, taking a system that has some basic capabilities and advancing it yourself.
One last question, and we'll call for the coffee break.
Yes. Yeah, I'm thinking about ING. We had a lot of problems this week with the online banking, and one of the problems was that the ING was being DDoSed at the application layer. So there was a DOS attack going on that the people were trying to log in ING, and that made ING stop working. So my question is, how would you go about fixing that? And why aren't the banks doing that right now already?
So obviously I can't speak to any particular organization, but DDoS is a problem that organizations should be able to address depending upon different aspects of it. You know, clearly there are layer 3 and 4 solutions that are well known to everybody and are out there. There are layer 7 solution providers that have become very, very good at dealing with this. When we're talking specifically about the Iranian attacks, like the Ababil 2, 3 type of attacks, that's an interesting animal because of the adaptive nature of them. And some of the service providers, which I won't mention here, but I'll be glad to talk about, you know, in private, have struggled a bit to adapt to some of those attacks. I think what's interesting there is that you have to look beyond the classic DDoS provider for some of these more advanced DDoS attacks too. There are some providers that are now looking at behavioral-based modeling of that environment as an alternative to classic DDoS protection. And that's something I would consider. In other words, not just treat it as a network device based on analyzing net flow datagrams at layer 7 to do that protection, which is how one of the major providers does it today, and arguably has done it fairly well except for these recent attacks. But there is another approach which is more based on deep packet inspection and layer 7 behavioral analysis. I think that's a good alternative approach for this type of thing. I've always thought that that plus threat intelligence would be a really good approach for DDoS protection, and there's a player that's doing that right now. That's all I can say without mentioning vendor names.
Thank you very much, Eddie. We'll now break for coffee break, so please join me in thanking Eddie for launching this year's conference.
Thank you.